Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I'm happy to greet you here at this plenary session, development of the loan business, how can we build our business taking loans, and this is a very relevant issue. That's a very topical question when we lack money, when we have to renew our assets and implement new technologies. The lack of money can become a barrier in the way of developing new production. On the one hand, it seems that the bank has all the money necessary for that, but unfortunately, the long-term investment from this side of bank investment is not very significant, and bank system needs new clients, and it's a vicious circle. And the most important issue here is to understand the issue of percentage rate. The entrepreneurs are not happy about such a high loan rate, and the banks, the enterprises, if they take that loan, that will put them into debt for a long term, and we have to break this vicious circle somehow. And that is why we're here. We're trying to answer these questions. Both bankers and representatives of the industry will be discussing it together. And to begin with, I will ask our experts to define our format of communication. After every speech, I would welcome questions, comments, remarks to each other, and it seems to me that it will make our discussion of high quality, but still you have 5 minutes for your presentation. And before starting this discussion between industrialists and bankers, I would like to ask the question to the main ideologist, to the main ideologue, the Vice Minister. Dear Vice Minister, under the sanctions, under the vacuum from the banking system in terms of investment into manufacturing, you created the foundation for industry development as an alternative to banks. And it was 3 years ago. I would like to know your opinion, and I think everybody is interested in that. What has changed in terms of accessibility of financing? What the Ministry of Industry and Trade has as means of financial assistance to industrial enterprises? Well, ideologue or an ideologist, it's a bit too high praise for me, but yet I made my contribution. And it turns out in our country that the means of assistance and support are created during crisis, and there has been a renaissance of our industry. It happened back in the late 1990s, and back in 2008 we created the foundation of our assistance measures, and the crisis of 2014 helped us to organize the foundation you've meant. So there are some dramatically new things, but they are very difficult to invent, and I think evolution of the instruments we have and dissemination of the instruments we have is the right way to do, and the better management, better administration of the existing instruments is the way to do. And as a back office, we used the so-called decree number 3. That's subsidies to investment laws, and we have about 150 projects, and we allocate 6-7 billion rubles. And 3-4 years ago, we had 0 rubles of support. It was difficult to manage. We had nothing to manage, and it was very complicated in general. Well, this year we subsidize the so-called waste concessions, and we worked out the subsidies up to 2019, and we increased the costs of the project we subsidize, but the original instruments is still the same which we had at the beginning. The next thing is that Now, among the things which are pretty new, maybe you're interested in something new we have. Now we have the project of subsidizing the so-called green papers. From the 1st of January 2019, we have a pilot transformation to the new technologies. We have about 300 enterprises, and the whole transfer is about 8 trillion rubles of investments. And the first 300 enterprises is about 750 billion rubles of investment into environmental equipment. And so we have this project of subsidizing state-issued securities, and there is a correlation between industry and bank, and we had representatives from the banking community. They offered such a program, and I love the banks which have industrial assets because they have different system of values, which is not very typical of the banks. And yet another thing I wanted to share with you, which is pretty new, is what we have with the National Export Program. Sometimes people tend to forget in their discussions that we have quite developed system of pre-export financing, and the loans you can receive through commercial banks, through Rosexim. All these programs are applicable to export programs within the country. And right now we are trying to disseminate this program on a large scale, and we think that there will be like tens or dozens of billion rubles of support rather than billions that we have now. And the champions in export, which are going to happen, which are going to take place in several years, otherwise without this support they won't be able to come to the stage. And as you may know, in our industry there is this model of assistant measures, and we have about 750 different instruments on the federal level and the regional level, and most of them are aimed at decreasing the cost of money for the enterprise. And it seems to me that our major reserve, our major margin in increasing accessibility of loans for industry is in the quality of administration. Not just increasing the amount of money, but improving the efficiency, because we have the bottlenecks linked with the number of people who can get involved into that. And as a rule, it's very easy to create tools, but it's very difficult to disseminate those tools. And coming back to the foundation of development of industry I mentioned, the Federal Reserve Program is a bright example of an efficient program which really could work, but it hit some ceiling, and we have about 20-30 billion rubles of loans every year, and it would be very difficult to disseminate this instrument. So we are at a dilemma whether to increase the number of programs or increase the amount of loans within every program. But with all this efficiency of this federal program, it is still a pilot project, and we should understand that it is yet a pilot project. Yes, I agree with the status of a pilot project, and that is why we're here, not to create a conflict between the industrialists and the bankers, but to find the common points, the overlaps, which would allow us to discuss our issues to mutual benefit. And the history of our foundation says that it's not a matter of money as such. Do we have enough projects from your viewpoint? Do we have enough projects within the country? What do you mean, the project within the country? We are supporting Russian enterprises, so we should talk about Russian enterprises. We should increase the efficiency of our work with the enterprises. So if the government, if the state just sits tight and waits for things to happen. Nothing is going to happen. So our model is twofold. We have to propagate, we have to disseminate this success story. We should build the network of cooperation with different enterprises, and we should get down to the ground. We should get down to specific enterprises and not just instill a culture of communication within them, but to find correlations between the bureaucracy and the industrialists. To my mind, when we say that there are not enough projects, we are wearing blindfolds. We are talking about some narrow corridor, that there are no projects which would correspond to our conditions. We should create more projects. We should grow them up. We should initiate new projects. We should prod them into action. And here is an example from the National Export Program. Right now, we have about 20% of growth because of export, and the 80% we are just searching for such projects. We have found only 20% of projects we can support. And if you initiate something, we will find measures of support for you. And to finalize this subject of exports, I would like to announce something. Right now, the government and the apparatus of the Ministry of Trade and Industry thinks of some amendments which would increase subsistence and finance for export-oriented projects. And the next speaker is Sergei Frolov. Mr. Frolov, I've got a question to you as a person working on the ground. How do you develop, how difficult or how easy it is to receive finances from the bank to get a loan for industry? What are the specific conditions? How can we make your life easier? Or can we possibly develop together, bankers and industrialists? For a large industrial company, taking loans is normal, it's okay. A large company or a medium-sized company takes loans, even long-term loans, and uses it as a leverage for development. And in our case, our holding has the turnover of 86 billion rubles, and we have 17.5 thousand workers, and we have quite an experience in attracting different financial instruments, but yet we have some stumbling blocks in the way of receiving loans. There are some difficulties in getting some loans. Within the last 4 years, we've been developing a mega project, I would say, for the Russian metallurgical industry, and it's the largest facility which is being built right now. I am trying to be cautious about sharing this information. It's going to start maybe early in the next year, and it will be 44.3 billion rubles. And in order to implement this project, we've attracted project financing, which is not linked with our group, but our group is not exactly a sponsor, but as a company which is responsible for the 30% of our project budget. And the 70% is taken from the loans, from banking loans. And it is a strategically important project for Russia. We used to produce raw materials and sell those raw materials abroad, but right now we have already a finished or semi-finished product, and we have high added value, and we sell it both domestically, replacing import. I'm sorry, we have no people over here who give you loans, just tell us how difficult it is. What are the difficulties in working with the banks? Well, in this project, it was pretty difficult. Well, the time frame was pretty difficult. It was difficult to go through the red tape, to go through all the documentation. It took us about 2 years to receive that financing. It is too long a term, and you're quite correct. We should get it much faster. For strategic project, it would be great to make it happen much faster, especially if those projects are of strategic importance for Russia. But at this stage, the risk analysis and all the red tape, it takes quite a while. Were there any stages which were superfluous in your mind? We've been discussing such things for quite a while, and those projects are like 10 billion rubles, and it's a large sum for our foundation. But in your opinion, are there any superfluous extra stages in your communication with the banks? Well, it's not like superfluous requirements or superfluous stages, but they are just too long, too prolonged, and that's the major stumbling block for the companies which would like to implement their projects. Thank you for your story. You were quite cautious about our bankers. I will try to make up for that. And my next question is to Mr. Budayev. You will have to be held responsible for all the banking community. How many projects do you have in industrial projects you have in the portfolio of your bank, and what's the rate, what's the loan rate, and why it is difficult for an enterprise, for an industrial girl, if I may put it like that, how difficult it is to get liked by the bank? What should she do about her makeup or something? Thank you for your question, and I can give you a background first. On the one hand, an industrial company is an ideal girl, an ideal bride for the bank, because unlike, for example, a bride from trading, industrial enterprises have assets, and as opposed to a service company, an industrial company has a portfolio and has some expertise, and it's much easier for a bank to analyze the work of such an industrial company. And if you compare, for example, this industrial company with a restaurant, for example, it's much easier to check the reports. But yet it's not a completely success story. Talking about project finance, you can compare it with teenagers' sex. Everybody keeps discussing it, but not everyone has it. Let's put it like this. So what's the difficulty over here? Banks have their own truth, and the level of default is quite high. Coming through all those crises, the crisis hit hardest those companies which had too many credits, too many loans, and were not very efficient in using those loans. And their productivity was not high enough. And the last research I saw in the mass media suggests that here in Russia we are in the top 5 in terms of the amount of labor spent. But we are in the lowest 5 in terms of work productivity and job efficiency. And the bank always looks at the story of the company, how efficient that company is. And those programs we have together with the Foundation for Development of Industry, it says that yes, there are such projects, but coming back to the questions you touched upon, we have seen that the projects have not been worked out enough, and the business models were not quite elaborate. there are wonderful ideas and people had wonderful propinquity for business, but when we try to assess the risks, we don't see plan B, we don't see plan C. All those complicated projects cannot go as planned. You have to have a margin for safety. So financing such projects together with the state, well, help and assistance from the state is a very good instrument, and we should keep disseminating it. And I would like to draw your attention to supporting the medium-sized business. We see what's happening on the market, that there are programs aimed at supporting large-scale business, and there are some programs aimed at the small businesses, but the medium-sized business, they grew up from the small-sized business. They do not keep their accounts in a notepad, but they still have an opportunity to develop new production, new lines. And there is a precious program of development the industry. We as bankers cannot see enough support in this sector of economy. So one of our suggestions is to pay more attention to medium-sized business and think about helping this target audience and this target model. I cannot restrain myself. I suggest you work out and you offer your loan with decree number 3 of the Ministry of Trade and Industry, and it seems to me that Ministry of Agriculture markets itself as an institution which uses the help of the state. Yes, we do participate in the small-scale business programs which we conduct together with the state institutions, and yes, we are ready to think about this program. And the cornerstone in the lack of interest in giving out loans is that it's a very complicated story, and there are some bits and pieces of the success story throughout the country. But the question is how to increase the amount of loans granted within this sector. So am I right to understand your suggestion that the entrepreneurs cannot prepare a proper business model? Yes, that is one of the points, and yes, it is a stumbling block for many projects. And what I said in the beginning, we can apply it even to the standard procedure of giving out loans. Even in this segment, in the medium-sized business, we have issues concerning efficiency and productivity and other things. And when we separate project financing and giving out loans, project financing is a very complicated instrument for banks. And of course, you should work together with the state, maybe sharing the risk with the state and work out some other kind of securities issued and security assurances for the business. And I would like to draw your attention to the statistics we have in June. The costs incurred by the industrialists increased by the same amount which used to be in 2015. It is connected with the growth of prices for imported raw materials and for petrol, for gas, and for industrial assets. And if we address the state, I do not know whether we have any federal programs of subsidizing industrial companies. If we decrease the rates for industrial companies, then to manufacturers, I think there will be more opportunities for those companies to use their own resources and spend that money for design and projects. And the issue of giving loans to the turnover money Thank you for not putting this load on us. We have not enough money for that. But there are lots of banks in the country which deal with such issues. And I've got another question for you, a very short one. Is it possible to have financing without giving you something in return? Yes, that is possible, but it is connected with the amount of money to be loaned. The higher is the risk perceived by the bank, the less the cost of project financing would be. And when we think about getting a profit from the project itself cannot sometimes cope with our requirements, so we should find an equilibrium. Sometimes it is possible, sometimes it is not. Still, the percentage rate and the sensibility of the project to this changes of the loan rate can be different from project to project. Thank you. And coming from the packaging of the project directly to the project, Mr. Danielian, the chairman of our experts community. As a representative of a business community, I've got several questions to you. For the 3 years we've been existing, the rate decreased twofold. And you as business community, as resources cost less and less, the important question, ideological question, if you have a long-term project of creating some new production, when our economy develops very fast and everything is changing very fast, and sometimes you cannot foresee and you cannot invent this ABC plan, what can an entrepreneur do? 7.25% is not quite a high rate, interest rate, although it used to be 15%. And what business really needs is equal opportunities. And we know that countries we have to compete with, they have that interest rate of 1 to 3%. So we should decrease our interest rate. And this high rate is one of the factors why our business is very cautious in working out their business plans and working out their investment projects. Our investment activity grew. If we look at the Russian business community, some people became more audacious and some people accumulated a very good credit score, and they come to your foundation and to other federal institutions to receive some assistance. So we've developed a taste and appetite to investment risk. But there are several factors apart from the interest rate which cut down, which curb this activity. One of those factors is that when you apply to any governmental institution, including the Foundation for Development of Industry or to the State Bank, if you apply for state credits, you have to disclose your business, you have to disclose your secrets, you have to open up, and very many enterprises, including fast-growing enterprises, cannot cooperate with the state properly because they are afraid of being too open. They think that any connection with the governmental money or governmental guarantees or subsidies will entail increased inspection and increased pressure from any monitoring agencies. And a lot of companies, as a result, are afraid of developing, although they have a brilliant potential for that. Yet another factor is growth of the public sector, when companies find it very difficult to compete for demand, and of course the demand is the major driver, and you have to prove it to the bank or to the federal institution that you are going to have sales. But you don't have guarantees of those sales, because even MSP corporation subsidies and assistance for small-sized business in federal contracts, this assistance is broken down into what they themselves see as more than half of the participants of the tenders are affiliated branches of the original companies participating in those tenders. And although we seem to be developing digital economy, the big brother of the artificial intellect of the tax authorities penetrate all our contracts, all our money flows, but yet they do not want to know anything about affiliated companies within the public sectors. They do not stop breaking it down into branches and daughters, and they do not allow us to use the market which the government actually promises to us. Yet another factor is the competencies of the teams. When there is an applicant coming to a federal institution for investments or for loans, it turns out that they are basically illiterate in terms of financing, and they don't have a proper teamwork. The participants of their team have no competences enough, and we can alleviate that. Well, we could alleviate that if there were proper incentives for re-education and proper training of those industrial teams. When we helped Ryazan region to turn into a digitalized territory, we had one of the major banks working on that territory, and they said, yeah, that's very interesting. We are going to test the applicants for investment loans. And that is why the banks see that the situation is of high risk, and they increase the rate because they don't have an instrument to assess the teams of the applicants for those investments. And coming back to your question about business plans, up to now, if you would like to buy some equipment, both abroad and in our plants, you have to stand in a long line. So this feeling that everything is changing very fast, well, it's pretty relative. On the one hand, those smartphones or other gadgets are changing very fast, but still, I produce these things on the very old equipment. I can change the software, but the hardware remains the same, and it's a long-term investment. So when I come to the Fund for Development of Industry with my investment projects, of course, I have to have a very serious business plan. This is an assessment of your understanding of what is happening at the market, what competitors, what rivals you have, what are their opportunities and possibilities. And yes, you may have plan B, plan C in the business plan, and it is highly valued both by the banks and by the governmental institutions. So it's very important to have a business plan, and you can change it while you implement your project, but you must have it, and the better you have it, the better it will be in the end. And there are lots of highly qualified consultants, experts who can give you consultations. What do you think when an expert, a consultant, prepares a business plan for an entrepreneur? Does this entrepreneur look into this business plan? Yes, most likely, but there are some development institutions, they try to defend their projects by their own consultants. But a very serious entrepreneur, a businessman, understands that he needs this business plan, not just to get the money from the foundation or from the bank or from any other institution, but such an entrepreneur, such a businessman, of course, studies the business plan very carefully and asks those consultants lots of questions and changes the business plan, and then is certain about defending this business plan or implementing it. So, what should industrialists do to have good credits, good loans, to increase their competences? Yes, that's right, but it's not the only thing. The other thing is to paint them white. If, for example, a fast-growing company faces this crazy red tape, very often they would like to go back to the gray economy. And of course, we need complete absolution of our sins. We need some painting enterprises white. We absolutely need that here in the Russian Federation, and the Unified Expert Council of our enterprises decided to implement this project, and we came to the president of the Russian Federation and to the law enforcement agencies and to taxation authorities, and there is a proper understanding, including the prosecutor's office, that without absolution of the sins, it's impossible to implement the May decree. Of course, if we want to mobilize not only the private initiative, but the federal financing as well. If we want to work really hard, we have to have this absolution of sins. Thank you very much, and I would like to make a bridge to the West and ask what practice do we have abroad. I will give the floor to KPMG partner Vasily Makarov. Why do you think the things are so badly organized in Russia? Why do we have so much work to do and such long terms of providing the loans? Thank you, and I seem to be continuing this issue about the bride and the groom. I think that right now we have a period of discord within our family, and the Ministry of Trade and Industry goes as a matchmaker from the bride to the groom, saying that everything is so beautiful and handsome and wonderful. But can I have the next slide, please? If we discuss loans, we have a stagnation right now because there is a lot of bad story, and the margin is going down, is going narrower and narrower, and it is about all banks in terms of the margin. It is a problem for all the banks and for all sectors. Next slide, please. And we have lots of debts, and the debts are growing from the physical entities, and this is a long-standing problem, and bankers recognize this issue. Sometimes they were made to admit this, and they have to cope up with this bad history, with this background for quite a while. And that is why the appetite, if I may put it like that, for investment is not going to grow in the nearest future. And the next thing is mother-in-law, if I can use this metaphor. This SPO9 factor, when you have specific requirements for reserves, and Russian banks are included into this story in terms of having reserve capital, and of course it puts additional pressure, and of course it limits us in our appetites. And when you have negative turnover, when you have bad operational processes, when you have negative dynamics in terms of income. That is why banks can refuse your loan. And of course, as colleagues already have mentioned, there are necessary instruments here in Russia, and we can discuss different opportunities for finances. And it was a great remark about openness for investments. You can go to stock exchanges, you can go to investors, but you should be open. Not only open to some governmental authority, to some governmental institution, but to the market in general. And there are lots of examples in the world when this openness pays back. Alibaba and other things we have heard on Facebook, when you issue state security and you have IPO for less than $1 million, and there are foundations for venture capital with very small capitals. So I think it was correctly said, it's just about the willingness to be open, and it's more about mentality rather than about the pressure from the government. And these support institutions they have abroad, there is nothing dramatically new. We have created, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the whole cycle, throughout the whole production cycle and throughout the whole industries, we have all the necessary instruments. And the point is to size them up properly. Let's take, for example, corporations which are penetrated banking system, and it is manifold, many times less rather than the case in developed countries in Europe and Japan. And the portfolio of RATSECs increased several times, and there is this question of administration, whether an exporter can receive any export guarantees. Can a creditor receive a guarantee within 2 days? What banks are doing, according to the 223 federal law, as a guarantee for a tender, they do it within 2 hours. So this client-oriented approach from the state authorities should appear in our country. And we should transfer from the product-centric model, when we worked at the product, at the rates, at the conditions, we should transfer to the client-centered approach, when the client is happy, is content, and recommends us to others. That becomes the key factor at this stage. And coming back to the banks, I would like to point it out what has been said already about the tenders, about the conditions of working under tenders, that there should be real companies over there, and about loans here in Russia, about P2P loans. We have only the first platforms appearing over here, because all the contracts on startups or any high-risk activities, the large amount of risk should be undertaken by the government, especially in Russia, where the prospects for investments for next 5 years, these long-term prospects can be undertaken, can be borne by the government, because the business over here takes risks for only 1 to 3 years. So the government should take those risks, and that's quite a sad story. I think that the institutions for development in this country have a lot to do over here, but it's a matter of a salary in the banking sphere and the matter of risks which are allowed for banks but not allowed to the governmental institutions. Vasily Sergeyevich, I address this to you, and the foundation has the objective of 100% return of loans. So you can refuse, but you cannot make a mistake. That's right. That's right. Thank you for the review of the foreign experience. And it seems to me that we still have to deal with it on the level of loan rate, interest rate. So what should we do when the amount of investment increases in the industry? The question is to the Deputy Minister of Внешэкономбанк Andrei Klepichev. We've heard the review of a foreign market. We have the interest rates over there. When are we going to see the light in the end of the tunnel, and when our enterprises will step on the path of taking loans without any comprehensions? Well, there is the light in the end of the tunnel, but what should be afraid of? Well, we always should be cautious, but to be more serious, in my opinion, conditions for growth of banking loans are non-existent here. We do not have such conditions. Last year, loans to enterprises, well, investment loans were insignificant, and other loans decreased significantly. This year, if I'm not mistaken, the preliminary data of the central bank is that within the first 5 months, the growth was about 5% if we calculate in rubles. But if we take into consideration the exchange rate of the currency, that would be about 3–4%, so it's slightly more than inflation. And of course, it's not only about the interest rate. Everybody speaks about the high interest rate, well, apart from the central bank, that is. I think that the interest rate is going to remain quite high. The second problem is that we do not have cheap liabilities, although it does not give us an opportunity to work long-term, and it does not allow us to take a lot of loans, and the mortgages are growing, and getting loans for the enterprise is curbed not only by not having cheap liabilities, but is also curbed by the interpretation of those risks by the central bank, because the central bank is only increasing pressure, and it's easier for them not to give loans, especially in complicated projects, rather than undertake risks. And it's the risk not only of the enterprises which take loans, but it's the risk of the bank first and foremost. And those who conducted aggressive investment policy, all of them are under sanction now for several different reasons. This is a problem, and to change it, we should change the policy of the central bank. But I don't think we should expect this. On the other hand, there are issues concerning the banking system itself, because under the present conditions, in my opinion, Внешэкономбанк is a specific organization. They have their own difficulties and they have their own opportunities. They have a huge portfolio of difficult assets, which is linked with the things they did for the government, on behalf of the government. On the other hand, it's simpler for them because they do not have to stick to the rules as precisely as other banks will have to do. That is why they can undertake long-term projects. And apart from the sanation they participate in, they can give loans for investment projects. So the first thing I think is that development institutions, the system of monitoring aimed at commercial banks is not suitable for it, and this issue is unresolved all over the world. Central banks do not require from the development institutions to be precisely following only regulations. Financing and refinancing, the loans given by Внешэкономбанк, they actually do require following all the regulations. So there should be some legislative changes, because for long-term investment projects it would be impossible to work with precise norms. Otherwise, banks will be giving investments only to Lukoil, Gazprom, only such huge companies like that. Another thing is that I think there should be closer cooperation between Внешэкономбанк and Ministry of Industry and Trade. Your foundation is monitored very closely by the Ministry of Industry and Trade, but despite the attempts you participate and I participated in, such models of cooperation which Ministry of Industry and Trade has with Внешэкономбанк, we unfortunately do not have such model. As an institution for development, it should work with the projects which are of priority for Ministry of Trade and Industry. And there are such projects we give loans to using the existing mechanisms such as subsidies and speaks. And I think that Внешэкономбанк should be more active in their work with the Ministry of Trade and Industry and use the subsidies and the instruments they already have. Although the projects and the programs we have, most of them are oriented at subsidies from the Ministry of Trade and Industry, and the program of diversification of industry has just started. There are projects which use speaks, and I'm not talking about exports over here. It's a different story, and subsidies have been properly worked out over there, both subsidizing the interest rate and the guarantees provided in terms of insurance. And basically this is double guarantees from Внешэкономбанк, from the state. And I think to participate in infrastructural programs, Внешэкономбанк should receive an opportunity to work with infrastructure foundation, which is going to be created quite soon, and it was reflected in the major approaches to working with the investment program. But so far we do not know how exactly it's going to work. Yet I think this is the resource which we need for resolving those infrastructural tasks. But it's not about all infrastructure projects, but only those where you can calculate the payback, the return of your loans. And Внешэкономбанк calculated the concession mechanism, including the work about the third orbital around Moscow and St. Petersburg northwestern diameter. So there is a nationwide experience of working with road infrastructure and working out with the highways. I think we will implement it, and the practice of work of the Foundation for Development of Industry, we even have this title over here, the loan and credit, but it's not the same, because the loans given by the Foundation for Development, it's not different only about the interest rate, but it's only different about the requirements. Although there are requirements for return of the money, and maybe the requirements are too stringent, because even the Foundation, even the Внешэкономбанк, they have to have this opportunity to work more openly, and we understand that when we talk to the prosecutor's office, well, those documents can help you, but from the viewpoint of business development, it's not going to help you anyway. So we have to have such an opportunity to working with the business models where you do not have to have anything to provide for your loan, but we have to have some other mechanisms guaranteeing your payback. But as far as I remember, when I worked in the ministry and when I worked in Внешэконом Bank, nobody received any money under the guarantees of the state. So it's a wonderful instrument, but basically useless. And we should change the mechanism of state guarantees, not only in terms of it being very fast. I cannot imagine how you can go through the red tape within 1 or 2 days, but basically we should make it actually a working instrument, and then the conditions for providing loans will change. And I think there are some plans for Внешэконом Bank like that. And I think we could create foundations which, for example, we are working about the project with Rosnana about investment, about supporting loans connected with green technologies, with the solar energy and wind energy, and those mechanisms are different, but they are accepted by foreign institutions, and I hope that we will be able to create a similar formula of work. So there must be a light in your soul, not only in the end of the tunnel, and I hope that our business will bring us light despite the difficulties in the process and despite the high interest rate.
It's not a very bright picture that you have drawn here, because the institute should continue to work and to make the banks do what they should do. I would like to add some good news in this bunch of not really good news. So I would like to congratulate the Vice President here for getting the prime of called industry. And please tell us, how can you develop your business through the investment? A bit louder, perhaps. Good afternoon, dear participants, and it is important for us to be here. First of all, we would like to thank the Industrial Development Fund for the invitation to this event, and the specialists of this fund for their support while with the realization of our project. Our enterprise is acting for more than 20 years. Our sphere is the production of the metal parts for the military complex. Our production experience and our potential in terms of the human capital allowed us to organize a new direction of our activity, the main goal of which is the import substitution. We are talking here about the blocks for modern machinery with the automotive programming, which allows to the industrial enterprises to replace import equipment. It's not a secret that this market is the Victoria. I am sorry. Yesterday, they said all about you. Tell us, are the banks scary? Yes, the banks are scary, and we are the bride who is choosing the groom for her, and it is rather difficult. And the main problem here is that thanks to the Industrial Development Fund, we of course got the collaboration, and we have an experience of winning tenders for Russian enterprises, and now we had a new task. In order to increase our efficiency and our participation in bigger tenders, we have one condition. It's time. In order to win, we have to have a warehouse of stored goods, of produced goods. And in order to realize that, we are addressing for a mechanism. And for an enterprise which wants to realize itself not in the financial area but in the production, there's such a problem. We can't to be as a corporation to manage the production and to manage the business itself. And the interest rates are rather high. And during the last 10 years, we have taken about 3 credits from Sberbank, and the rate was 20%. It was before the crisis of 2014. And after that, we had the rate of 19%. And so we denied this. And we are working with our production, and we are working within our company. And so we have the full cycle, actually. And here we can say that the financial product that we are looking for and that we see on the market is not responding to our requirements. And not a single bank in Russia can propose us a rate competitive with the banks abroad, which have the rates about 2 or 4%. And here in Russia, the rate is 11%, and we would like to have it 1% with credit for 5 years. Where can we find such a variant? So now we are looking for some variant. How can we realize our project? But the main thing, we know that we should improve our efficiency of the market, and for that it is enough only to eliminate the criteria of time in the tenders. And our company is ready to do that. And even if the foreign companies can allow themselves to work with the delay of 15 years, but we can't. And our problem is that to get the metal for the production, it's 6 months. And so if we decide this problem, we will increase our capacity. And if we increase our capacity, we will be more productive and more useful for our state. And even if in terms of the taxes, because our taxes, it's very big amount of money. It's like 315 million rubles. But in order for us to be competitive, we just need the storage of produced goods. So how can we realize it? We address ourselves to the banks, to different institutes. So we have managed to get a full cycle, and now we have to take the next stage, next step, in order to increase the social efficiency. So we will address your question. We are in euros, and here we have the Bank of Reconstruction and Development, the Euro Bank of Reconstruction and Development, Revuzova Olga. Can you help? Yes, good afternoon. With Victoria, I cannot say that we will for 100% resolve the problem of Victoria, but we are neighbors here, and we will talk, of course, about the credits and the loans after INNOPROM ends, and I think we will find common points of interest here. But I was listening very attentively to the speakers, and I would like to say the following. What are my impressions? What are your loans? What are your delays? And how eager you are to give loans? Well, the problem is here that the banks and the real sector are not in war. It's just imagined. As I know, the most part of the banks can have dialogue with the representatives of businesses, and we understand, of course, that it is the base of our business. It's the stable client base. If we talk about our bank, so about 30% of our loans are investment loans. They are headed towards the development of the industry, so it's 30%. And the rates for the last years are decreasing, as I see. and the key rate is also decreasing. And of course, the trends are connected to that. But we cannot dream about 1-2% as it is in Europe, because we should have the same level of economy development and the same level of the law and regulations and different state institutes. And we are living here. And for us, I think this level is rather optimal. And today's key rate is lower. But now you can give some ad for your bank. Well, I can say that the level that we have today in practice, it's about 9-10%, and the maximum delay is 7 years, not more than 7 years. And also, I would like to say that we have different products. And Victoria told us about a mix, about the investment loans and the working capital. But if we talk about the investments, the bank are obliged to assess their risks and to be cautious about the projects they choose, because these projects should have some future and should be realized as a result. So here, nothing scary. I would like to point your attention to the fact that in any dialogue we have two parts. And when the banks understand very well the problems of business, they understand the peculiarities of our work conditions. So we also address to business that the business should understand the reality of the banks about the risks and about the fact that we have some regulations and laws that we can't ignore. And at the moment when we will hear each other, we will have understanding instead of a conflict. Thank you. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. We are on time, so we have time for the questions from the audience. And if you want to ask something, you have time for that. Great. Yeah, we have one question. Good afternoon. My name is Andrei. I'm the vice president of the Ural Union of the Industrials, and I am the chief of the Union of Developers companies. I own a business, a medium group of multi-profile companies. Thank you very much for the Institute of the Development. We were looking at it for a very long time, and it seemed to us that, how should I put it, the problem is overlooked, because you can't do anything supporting the project, and it seemed like you will not be able to gather here all the entrepreneurs and all the bankers. But now we see that the situation is with no exit, and we can't speak with the bankers about anything today, and it's just in vain. There are some fundamental reasons because of which the dialogue isn't possible. When you get your money to flow, it is not reasonable to get all the money from all the country and to go to the markets and to speculations. We will not do anything useful while the speculation is the main income resource in our country. But we, in the real sector, we are forced to take very high risks, which can be integrated with the existing banking regulations and risk assessment systems. So in my holding, I am the chief of investment committee. When we are offered to buy a business or an object, if we see the credit loan by Sberbank, Alfa-Bank or Gazprombank, and it's a black mark, because not any no reasonable person will sign the contract where there is a increase of the interest rate without any accordance. And I'm not talking even about the mortgages. It's just a dialogue without sense. And what should we talk about today? We talk about that with this financial system like that, we cannot talk about the development. Of course, the economic growth isn't the priority for the government today, but even in these conditions, the business community, which is 25% in the country, should put out the question about another economic system. Here we cannot be oriented towards the Russian banks. I'm sorry. Let's put it in other way. It's like a famous joke when a man is complaining how my wife has left me, I have no money, and the God is telling that should we prolong your contract? Well, we have prolonged our contract, but here we have very serious people, and we are very grateful to you, of course, because we are together with you here. But if today we are not saying what we have really, if we don't put out the questions about the creation of alternative system of loans, because we can do nothing without loans. Can I make a comment? So you think that the bankers are risking our money? They are not risking their money. They are risking with the money their of their depositors and investors. Are you ready to give your money to startups? And also there are some regulations by central bank, and they are creating the rules of this game. And the task of the bankers is to earn money, because it's a business also, respecting the rules without losing the money of their depositors. Well, can you understand that when we are hearing the talk about the bankers working with the money of the depositors, and when my colleagues from Sberbank are telling me how much are these passive assets, why are we lying to each other? If the banking system is a state system, of course, the system has some priorities, and the costs are different, and we know what are these costs. And if you're saying that they are responsible for other people's money, well, I was on an event with the vice president of Gazprom Bank, and he said to me, "Why we should give you money? You will steal it." And I told them that you should just count how many loans, how many billions of loans you have given, and how many trillion of rubles is going for sanation of the banks. If 1/10 would be spent to compensate this fact, we would have the diversified economy. Of course, somebody will be broke, and something would be stolen, but this system just can't exist. Thank you. I'm obliged here to defend our bank system, but of course there's a conflict of interest here. But according to our statistics, I'm talking about the Industrial Development Fund. Almost in all the project we have the banking financement, and every fifth project had the bank guarantee, and the borrower goes to the bank and receives this bank guarantee. And a bit of the advertisement. We decreased our interest rate from 5 to 3% for the project with the bank guarantees. The banks are not so scary that we have painted here. So Dmitry Yeroshok, the chief of the Untitled leasing company, I would like to thank you for your remark which led to discussion. Just I can make a comment just from my experience. We are doing investment for the last 20 years, and we were working from the beginning in the zone with no risks with Gazprom, and after that we were working with the Sberbank, and the managers have the task. They have the KPI, and you have reports every week. And from the other hand, you have the KPI about not growing the overdue loans. So it's the problem which exists, but we are living here in our country. And from the one hand, we have to develop our state as an enterprise which is combined from many enterprises which have to produce products and goods and working places, and we should export these goods after that. And from the other hand, we have a very bad history about when we give money to everybody and when we just can't get them back. So a little advertising of my company. This idea was realized in INNOPROM leasing. I believe in that the partnership between the state and the private companies is the tool of guarantee for the state. I am a businessman, of course. I need some money and I can make something mortgaged, a pledge. I can pledge my apartment and I will lose something that is precious for me. But the banks are assessing the team also, the competences of this team. And people who know nothing just can't work in the bank and get some money. And if the bank sees that this team, these people have done something similar, they can do it again. And yet another point, there is a bridge between the real position of the businesses and the bank policies. And we are discussing today the reform of the leasing industry. And if we are introducing leasing in central bank, and leasing will be in banks and will be stopped. So the fund with the advance payment of leasing with the equipment which is not which can be capitalized, and the fund takes pledges for this equipment. And here we see that we have a pledge, you have your property, and so this is cheaper by 30% compared to the market. So that's why, if you allow me, I will highlight the following. First, people who we work with should lose something if they are broke, personally, ideally. And Gref, when we were beginning our work, he took their homes, their houses, and their yachts. And it was not really official, but the pledge of some sort. And second, we have to resolve a problem. It's the mandate of Внешэкономбанк also. We have to synchronize the task which is in the industrial development of the country and the tools that are owned by the bank and give the possibility to finance this development. From my point of view, the instrument which can be given by the fund can allow banks to give resources and to co-finance the businesses. If the fund gives loans, we can support them. I will end here. Thank you very much. Can I say for last? Of course, the dialogue is useless here. We have colleagues here, and I answer to your question. We will see your project, and We will try to rectify the reputation of the banks and offer you some interesting conditions after this event. Thank you very much for a very interesting discussion. I hope that we have discussed some practical questions, but more practice in half an hour. The Industrial Development Fund will tell us about how they are financing the industrial enterprises, and we will talk about leasing, and we will say how it is working. Thank you very much.